Harlem, New York, 1935. Night settles over the city like a low note on a saxophone. Neon lights flicker against wet pavement. Jazz spills out of open doors, drifting down Lenox Avenue, wrapping the streets in rhythm and smoke. Couples laugh, cabs idle. The music makes Harlem feel alive, even in the middle of the Great Depression. This neighborhood is black. The culture is black. The sound that made New York famous is black. But the power is not. At the center of it all stands the Cotton Club, the most glamorous nightclub in America. Crystal chandeliers, perfect suits, champagne flowing freely, Duke Ellington's music electrifying the room night after night. Yet behind the velvet rope is a rule everyone understands, but few say out loud. Black people may perform here, black people may serve here, but black people do not sit here. On this night, a man approaches that door. He does not arrive with bodyguards. He does not shout. He does not carry himself like a gangster. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walks calmly beneath the streetlight, navy suit pressed, shoes polished, posture deliberate. To most of the city, he is invisible. To Harlem, he is known, not for noise, but for precision. He steps toward the entrance of the Cotton Club, toward a doorway that separates glamour from humiliation and history from what it refuses to acknowledge. And when a doorman decides to remind him where he belongs, Bumpy Johnson does something no one expects. He does not reach for violence, he reaches for memory. Because what happened after this insult didn't involve a gun, but it shook New York harder than violence ever could. To understand what that moment meant, the pause at the door, the tension in the air, you have to understand Harlem in 1935. Because Harlem was not just a neighborhood, it was a city within a city. The Great Depression had drained the nation of certainty, but in Harlem, it had done something worse. It had exposed the truth. Jobs vanished first here. Wages collapsed faster. Black families felt the crash not as a headline, but as an empty kitchen, a rent notice, a pawned wedding ring. Bread lines stretched along sidewalks just blocks away from ballrooms filled with music. Talent was everywhere. Money was not. This was the contradiction of Harlem in the 1930s. The Harlem Renaissance had given America its rhythm, its poetry, its soul. Jazz, literature, fashion, all born here, all celebrated everywhere else. White audiences crossed bridges and tunnels to consume black culture, to dance to black music, to marvel at a neighborhood they treated like an exhibit. But when the night ended, the profits left with them. Most of Harlem's clubs were not owned by the people who filled them with life. They were owned by white businessmen who understood something essential. Black creativity was valuable as long as black people themselves stayed in their place. No venue embodied that truth more than the Cotton Club. From the outside, it was pure spectacle, glowing lights, sharp suits, the promise of elegance in a city desperate for escape. Inside, the orchestra was black, the dancers were black, the waiters, cooks, cleaners, all black. The audience was not. Every table was reserved for white patrons, tourists, politicians, gangsters, socialites, people who came to Harlem for the thrill, but never to share it. This was segregation without signs, Jim Crow without legislation, Northern racism dressed in tuxedos instead of uniforms. Everyone knew the rules. Black performers entered through side doors. Black workers disappeared between shifts. And black residents, no matter how well-dressed, how successful, how respected, did not cross the velvet rope. It wasn't just exclusion, it was theater. Because segregation in the North didn't rely on shouting or whips, it relied on embarrassment, on public reminders, on moments designed to say, you can see the stage, but you will never sit in the seat. Private racism could be ignored. Public humiliation could not. When it happened in front of a crowd, when dignity was stripped openly, the message traveled far beyond the person being insulted. It echoed through the block, the neighborhood, the community. And in 1935 Harlem, where pride was one of the few things the Depression had not yet stolen, those moments mattered, because Harlem was watching. The man walking toward that door was not loud, and he was not reckless. Before Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson became a legend whispered in barbershops and police files, he was something rarer in a violent world, a thinker. Bumpy Johnson loved chess, not as a pastime, but as a discipline. He studied openings, endgames, patience. He understood that the board did not reward the fastest hand. It rewarded the mind that could see 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. That mindset shaped everything about him. He spoke softly. He listened longer than he talked. And when he acted, it was never impulsive. In Harlem, people noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because problems seemed to settle when he entered a room. Disputes ended quietly. Lines were respected. Chaos found limits. Bumpy did not rule by volume. He ruled by certainty. Beyond Harlem, his name carried weight of a different kind. He had relationships with Jewish and Italian syndicates, not as a subordinate, but as a negotiator. He understood contracts, territory, percentages. He spoke the language of business in rooms where black men were rarely allowed to speak at all. To them, he was useful. To Harlem, he was necessary. His influence ran through the policy racket, the underground lottery that fed entire neighborhoods when banks and employers would not. For many families, policy money paid rent, bought food, kept lights on. It was illegal, yes, but it was also survival. And Bumpy controlled it with order. Violence was bad for business. Chaos invited police attention. Discipline kept everything running. That discipline showed in how he presented himself. Bumpy dressed with intention, suits pressed, shoes polished, no excess, no flash. He understood something most men in power learn late. Appearance is a statement long before words are spoken. He walked slowly. He stood straight. He never rushed, because rushing suggests weakness. So when an invitation to the Cotton Club arrived, not as a dare, not as a provocation, but as a meeting, it mattered. A Jewish businessman wanted to talk, legitimate money, discreet conversation, neutral ground. And in 1935, there was no more neutral or more symbolic ground than the Cotton Club. For Bumpy Johnson, this was not about nightlife. It was about access. About whether a black man who controlled Harlem's underground economy could step into the most famous room in his own neighborhood without being reminded of his place. He did not go to challenge the rules. He went expecting the rules to bend. And that expectation, quiet, reasonable, earned, is what made what happened next impossible to ignore.
The Cotton Club's entrance glowed like a promise. Music pulsed behind the walls. Laughter drifted through the air. White patrons queued casually behind the rope, confident, unchallenged, certain the night belonged to them. Bumpy Johnson approached without hesitation. He did not look around. He did not slow his step. He walked as a man who expected to be acknowledged. That expectation ended at the door. The doorman stepped forward, uniform crisp, shoulders squared, voice sharpened by the authority of the rope he guarded. He looked Bumpy up and down, not with curiosity, but with certainty. Not loud, not emotional, just loud enough for the people behind to hear. The words were not complicated. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of an entire system, reminding a black man in his own neighborhood that this door was not meant for him. The tone mattered more than the language. It was practiced, routine, a sentence spoken so many times it no longer required thought. This wasn't anger, it was entitlement. Around them, the line froze. White patrons watched. Some smirked, some stared straight ahead, others shifted uncomfortably as if silence might erase what was happening in plain view. No one spoke, because this was how things worked. Segregation did not require agreement, only compliance, and compliance was easier when humiliation was someone else's problem. The insult was public by design. Private racism could be denied, public humiliation could be enforced. This was not about entry, it was about reminding everyone watching who held power and who did not. For a brief moment, the air felt tight, heavy, expectant. This was the point where violence usually entered the story. A shove, a shout, a reason for police sirens and headlines that blamed the victim. But Bumpy Johnson did nothing. He stood still. And then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, a small, measured curve of the mouth. The kind of smile that unsettles people who believe they are in control. Because it wasn't submission, it was calculation. In that second, Bumpy Johnson understood something the doorman did not. Power does not always strike immediately. Sometimes it waits. Without raising his voice, without offering an argument that would never be honored, Bumpy turned away from the rope. He did not rush, he did not glance back. He walked down the street as the music swallowed the moment behind him, leaving the crowd confused, unsatisfied, unsure whether they had just witnessed defeat or something far more dangerous. Because Harlem had seen rage before. What it had never seen was restraint used as a weapon.
Bumpy Johnson did not walk away in anger. He walked away in silence, the kind that lets thoughts settle into shape. The night air cooled his face as he moved north through Harlem, past storefronts still glowing, past laughter and music that spilled freely onto the sidewalk. The city did not stop for his humiliation. It never did. That, too, was part of the lesson. He walked block after block, his pace unhurried, his mind working. Every insult replayed not as an emotional wound, but as information. Chess players don't react to a bad move, they study the board. At Lenox Avenue, the sound changed. The Savoy Ballroom rose ahead of him, alive, electric, open. Couples poured through its doors without hesitation. Black men, black women, well-dressed, working class, middle class, church folks, dreamers. No rope, no side door, no permission required. Inside, bodies moved freely to music born in the same streets Bumpy now walked. Laughter was louder here. The joy was real, not borrowed. And in that contrast, something sharpened. 2 buildings, 2 rules. At the Cotton Club, Harlem's culture was packaged, sold, and rationed. Entry granted only to those deemed worthy by people who did not live there. At the Savoy, Harlem belonged to itself. That was the deeper insult. Not the doorman's words, extraction without respect. White ownership fed on black creativity, black labor, black rhythm, then sent the profits downtown, across town, anywhere but back into the neighborhood that created it. Harlem made the music. Harlem filled the kitchens. Harlem cleaned the floors.
But Harlem did not control the doors. And worse, the people who did believed this imbalance was permanent. Bumpy stopped walking. He understood now that revenge would be easy and useless. Violence would justify crackdowns, riots would invite punishment, fire would only burn Harlem itself. That was not power. Power was pressure. Quiet, coordinated, relentless. Not an explosion, a squeeze. Not chaos, structure. The idea did not arrive as anger. It arrived as clarity. If white-only businesses wanted to profit in black neighborhoods, they would do so under new conditions. If they extracted value without respect, the cost would rise, slowly, legally, economically. And as Bumpy Johnson turned away from the Savoy and continued into the night, the insult at the door was already fading, replaced by something far more dangerous, a strategy.
By the time the night thinned and Harlem streets grew quieter, Bumpy Johnson was no longer alone with the idea. He knew strategy meant nothing without structure. And structure required people who did not usually sit at the same table. The first call went to Stephanie St. Clair. In Harlem, her name carried weight that did not need explanation. The queen of the policy racket was more than a numbers operator. She was a tactician, a woman who had battled police, politicians, and rivals with lawsuits, press campaigns, and an unshakable understanding of power. She believed in order. She believed in leverage. And she believed Harlem should never kneel quietly. She listened. She asked questions. She understood immediately. The second call went somewhere very different. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr. From the pulpit of Abyssinian Baptist Church, his voice reached tens of thousands. Respectable families, workers, business owners, people whose influence did not come from fear, but from trust. Where Bumpy commanded silence, Powell commanded belief. He too listened, and he recognized the moment for what it was. Not a nightclub dispute, but a moral fracture made visible. Other calls followed. Lawyers who knew how to slow proceedings without breaking laws. Union figures who understood how timing, staffing, and cooperation could shape profit. Community leaders who could move opinion without shouting. By the next evening, a meeting came together in a back room after hours. Chairs turned upside down, lights dimmed low. People who would never be photographed together shared the same air. Criminals, clergy, labor. In another city, at another time, this would have been impossible. In Harlem, it was inevitable. What mattered was not who they were, but what they controlled. Labor controlled flow. Churches controlled legitimacy. Business owners controlled money. And Bumpy Johnson controlled coordination. This was not a mob. It was a coalition. There were voices in the room that demanded retaliation. Others wanted lawsuits. Some spoke of protest. Bumpy let them talk. He had learned long ago that people reveal their limits when they speak freely. Then he set the rules. There would be no violence, no fires, no threats shouted in the street, no chaos. Because chaos invites force, and force always falls hardest on Harlem. What they were building required patience, discipline, silence. They would not attack the Cotton Club. They would surround it. They would not argue with segregation. They would invoice it. The idea was simple and devastating. If a business insisted on discrimination, it would pay for it. Not in blood, not in broken glass, but in lost time, lost money, lost comfort. They would make discrimination expensive. Not once, not dramatically, but every day. So expensive that even tradition would begin to feel negotiable. As the meeting ended and people slipped back into the night, something rare had formed. An agreement across boundaries Harlem had never fully crossed before. Not a protest, not a riot, a system. And at its center stood a man who understood that real power doesn't announce itself. It applies pressure and waits.
What followed did not look like resistance. There were no marches, no shouting crowds, no broken windows for photographers to frame. That was the brilliance of it. The Cotton Club continued to open its doors every night, lights on, music scheduled, champagne chilled. From the outside, nothing appeared different. But inside the machine, the gears began to slip. The first pressure came through labor. Not refusal, not strikes, just friction. Waiters took longer routes between tables. Orders arrived a little late. Glasses weren't refilled as quickly. Musicians played their sets, but transitions lagged. Cue changes missed by seconds that felt like minutes to impatient patrons. No single mistake could be punished, but together the rhythm broke. A nightclub lives on timing, on precision, on illusion, and the illusion was beginning to crack. Then came economic pressure. Suppliers who had long serviced the Cotton Club began to hesitate. Deliveries arrived late or not at all. Prices edged upward. Contracts suddenly required renegotiation. Some vendors found that doing business with the club caused problems elsewhere in Harlem. Repairs delayed, storage unavailable, credit tightened. No threats were issued. The message traveled quietly. Profit, like water, avoids resistance, and suppliers began choosing easier paths. Next came moral pressure. On Sunday mornings, the conversation moved from nightclubs to pews. Pastors did not shout names. They did not call for boycotts outright. They asked questions. Why should a business profit in Harlem while denying Harlem's people dignity? Why should black labor build wealth it is never allowed to enjoy? It was not accusation, it was arithmetic. Congregations listened, heads nodded, and quietly choices were made about where money would and would not be spent. Then came legal pressure. Inspectors appeared with clipboards and patience, fire codes reviewed, licenses double-checked, paperwork examined with a thoroughness usually reserved for political enemies. Nothing was invented, the law was simply applied, fully. Each visit cost time, each review cost money, each correction slowed the operation just a little more, and none of it could be called harassment. It was procedure. Inside the Cotton Club's offices, frustration grew. Managers held meetings, owners asked questions, expenses climbed, complaints increased. Patrons noticed the difference not as injustice, but as inconvenience. And inconvenience is poison to luxury. No single problem threatened the club. That was the point. Every issue was small, defensible, deniable. But together they bled the nightclub slowly, the way pressure drains a system without ever touching the surface. Every night the light still came on, and every night the cost of discrimination quietly rose. Because in Harlem, a lesson was being applied with surgical care. Every problem is small. Together, they are fatal. At the heart of Harlem's nightlife was the music, and no one symbolized its contradiction more than Duke Ellington. Ellington's orchestra defined the Cotton Club's sound, elegant, innovative, unmistakably black. His music drew white audiences from across the country, filled tables, sold drinks, and built reputations. Yet, even as his name glittered on marquees, his movement was restricted. side entrances, segregated spaces, rules that reminded him daily that brilliance did not equal belonging. Ellington could not lead a protest. A single public statement could end contracts, freeze bookings, and silence the very platform that allowed his music to exist in that room. So resistance took another form: quiet coordination. Musicians talked, not in press conferences, but in hallways, after sets, between rehearsals. Availability became flexible, schedules shifted, booking extensions stalled, commitments grew uncertain. Nothing was declared, but the system felt it. At the same time, black-owned clubs began to rise. Small's Paradise, the Savoy, venues where the audience looked like the neighborhood, where dignity didn't require explanation, where a well-dressed black patron didn't have to ask permission to enjoy the music they helped create. With quiet financial backing and community support, these spaces improved. Better bands, better promotion, better nights. And Harlem noticed. Patrons began making choices. They could dress up and sit beneath chandeliers in rooms that did not want them, or walk a few blocks and be treated like human beings. Glamour lost its shine when paired with insult. Money followed dignity. Each ticket purchased elsewhere mattered. Each drink ordered at a black-owned bar shifted the balance slightly. Alone, it meant little. Together, it became leverage. For the first time, Harlem saw something clearly. It was not just a cultural engine, it was an economic one. The music did not belong to the Cotton Club. The audience did not belong to downtown money. The neighborhood did not exist to be mined and abandoned. As bookings shifted and crowds redistributed, power moved, slowly but unmistakably. And in that movement, Harlem learned a lesson it would never forget. When culture controls money, and money chooses dignity, even the most exclusive doors begin to listen.
Months passed. No headlines announced a victory. No policy change was posted on the door. The Cotton Club did not apologize. But something had shifted. One crisp evening, long after the memory of the insult had settled into Harlem's collective awareness, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson returned to the same street, the same glow of neon, the same hum of music vibrating through brick and glass. He arrived the way he always did, alone, unhurried, dressed with intention. The doorway looked the same: velvet rope, polished brass, white patrons drifting inside without a second thought. But the man at the door was different. Younger, nervous, carefully trained to keep his voice even. Bumpy stepped forward. There was no exchange of words, no raised chin, no challenge waiting to explode. The doorman looked at him, not with authority, but with awareness. Then he moved. The rope lifted. The path cleared. No announcement followed. No crowd reacted. No music stopped. Inside, the Cotton Club continued exactly as it always had. But at one of the tables, beneath the chandelier light, sat a black patron. Not performing, not serving, not hidden. Seated. No celebration marked the moment. No speech claimed it. And that was the point. This was not a victory designed for spectacle. It was a recalibration, a signal that something once considered immovable had begun to bend. A riot would have confirmed every fear. It would have invited retaliation, repression, and headlines that erased the cause behind the chaos. This did the opposite. It forced acknowledgement. Because the most unsettling thing for a system built on exclusion is not noise, it is quiet change, presence without permission. And as Bumpy Johnson took in the room, Not with triumph, but with confirmation, Harlem understood something profound. The door had not opened because someone felt generous. It opened because pressure had been applied and maintained.
What happened next did not stay at the Cotton Club. Power never does. Once the door cracked open, the shock traveled outward, through Harlem, across New York, and into rooms where decisions were made quietly, behind desks and closed doors. The Cotton Club did not collapse overnight, but it began to fade. Reservations thinned, tourists complained that something felt off. Costs rose as delays multiplied and contracts frayed. Musicians rotated elsewhere. The magic that once made the club untouchable no longer insulated it from pressure. Harlem had learned how to apply weight without breaking glass, and the Cotton Club felt every pound of it. Within a few years, the club would leave Harlem altogether, officially blamed on economics, changing tastes, and legal scrutiny. Unofficially, everyone understood the truth. A whites-only institution could no longer operate comfortably in a neighborhood that had learned how to resist without chaos. The message reached City Hall. Political leaders who had long treated Harlem as a cultural district but a political afterthought began returning phone calls. Meetings that once required pleading now involved negotiation. Votes were counted more carefully. Concerns were addressed with new urgency. Harlem was no longer just loud, it was organized. Law enforcement noticed too. Federal agents and city detectives had always watched Bumpy Johnson for gambling and underworld connections. Now they noticed something different and far more unsettling. He was meeting with pastors, speaking with union figures, influencing businesses without visible threats. What they were witnessing wasn't just criminal activity, it was infrastructure. A community capable of coordinated economic action, backed by discipline and silence, operating outside official channels, but achieving results the law had never delivered. That combination made authorities nervous, because it suggested a truth power rarely likes to admit. Control does not always come from badges or legislation. Sometimes it comes from leverage. And Bumpy Johnson's reputation changed because of it. To the press and police files, he remained a gangster, a policy operator, an associate of syndicates, a man whose name appeared often and never kindly. But in Harlem, the definition expanded. He was no longer just feared. He was consulted. Business owners asked for his help in disputes. Community leaders weighed his opinion. Outside operators learned that Harlem now had a negotiator, someone who could translate disrespect into consequence. Not a politician, not a civil rights leader, a power broker. And what had begun with a single insult at a nightclub door quietly became something larger than one man or one venue. It became a blueprint. Economic pressure instead of riots, coalition instead of isolation, moral authority paired with tactical leverage. Years later, similar methods would surface under different names: boycotts, collective action, targeted disruption, movements praised in textbooks and documentaries. But long before they were celebrated, they were tested here, in Harlem, by people who had learned that when dignity is denied politely, it must be enforced strategically. And New York never looked at Harlem the same way again.
But history is never that clean. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson did not emerge from this story as a saint, and Harlem never pretended he was one. He enforced order, but he also profited from it. He protected the neighborhood, but he ruled parts of it through fear. He paid hospital bills and funeral costs, and he oversaw an underground economy that brought harm alongside survival. Both truths existed at the same time. That contradiction is uncomfortable, especially when viewed from a distance, But communities under pressure do not get to choose perfect defenders. They choose the ones who show up, the ones who answer calls, the ones who can move obstacles when institutions refuse to. In Harlem, justice had rarely arrived through official channels. Police did not protect black residents. Courts did not move quickly for them. City leaders did not listen until pressure made silence inconvenient. So Harlem adapted. It learned to live with imperfect power, because imperfect power was better than none at all. Bumpy Johnson understood this reality, and he lived inside it. He did not claim moral purity, he claimed effectiveness. When landlords exploited tenants, he intervened. When outside operators preyed on local businesses, he pushed back. When disputes threatened to spill into violence, he imposed boundaries, at a cost. Because the same structure that allowed him to defend Harlem also bound it to an underground economy, one that blurred lines between protection and control, between survival and exploitation. This is the tension history rarely resolves. We want heroes without stains, victories without consequences, change without compromise. But progress does not move through ideals alone. It moves through people, flawed, strategic, often morally complicated people operating inside systems designed to deny them fairness. The Cotton Club story forces a hard truth into the open. Progress doesn't always come from clean hands. Sometimes it comes from hands willing to grip power where power refuses to loosen itself. And whether we admire that or recoil from it, the outcome remains. A door once sealed did not stay closed. And Harlem remembered who helped push it open.